Okay, welcome back to Rockstock Channel. It is Thursday, July 10th, and today we have back on the program Steve LeVine in Washington, who writes for The Electric, which is part of The Information. And Steve, you could summarize again what you do as a journalist and that publication. Steve wrote a book in 2015 called The Powerhouse, which focused on NMC batteries. And so a few people have been studying the battery industry as long as Steve. Steve has also commented very significantly as a proponent of LFP batteries in recent years. But we're here because Steve's written two uh, good articles on the back of the passage of what I'm calling Trump's big, beautiful battery bill. Because the big, beautiful bill uh, was actually not so good for EV tax credits, was not so good for wind and solar, was not so good, on foreign entity of control rules. But Steve argues that, and he will argue that it's been not so bad for batteries. But we also have today with me with a view from London on Trump's big beautiful battery bill. Matt Fernley, who we speak to regularly, and commented to me that yeah, it looks pretty bad for EVs and solar, but not so much for batteries. So we're gonna have Matt share some of his views, and he may ask Steve some questions as well. But overall, the headlines have not been great. I'm going to summarize Iola Hughes of RoMotion, who we've had on the program, posted right after the battery bill was passed. I'm sorry, the big beautiful bill was passed. Said that EV leasing, which made up 2/3 of U.S. EV sales this year, lost its tax support. Battery energy storage systems tied to solar and wind will likely see slowed deployment, and accessing remaining tax credits like 45X got a lot harder, especially for projects with even a trace of Chinese involvement. And another woman I follow, Gracelyn Bascaran at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, warned that the bill pulls the rug out from with demand side incentives. Without the EV tax credit, she argues U.S. miners and refiners might lose their most important long-term buyer. And with lithium prices down 87% since 2022, critical minerals projects risk turning back towards Chinese offtake just to stay alive, right? So the headline's not so great, but Steve, as I said, who actually was somewhat bearish when we spoke 6 months ago, and 12 months ago about the prospect of a Trump, victory, basically said there's more to this bill than meets the eye. There's $100 billion in new lending authority coming from the Department of Defense, and they may actually green light Chinese joint ventures. So, Steve, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but believes that the battery bill could actually supercharge U.S. battery capacity, unlocking next generation technologies like lithium sulfur, and even laying the groundwork for a grand bargain with China, one that mirrors how China brought U.S. automakers into their tent in the 1990s. So, what say you, Steve? Is that a good characterization of your two articles, which will flash up here? The first one was entitled, How Big Funding for Battery Projects Got Past Trump, and Trump's budget bill awards tax credits to Chinese battery joint ventures.
Yeah. So, yeah, Howard, I do think as you kind of teed up there, you and I had discussed this, and we were like not lone, but almost lone voices in the wilderness to the industry, not to be sanguine um, about the uh, IRA tax credits. That even though Democrats had front loaded the awards to red states, like 3/4 of them or more of those credits went to red states. That didn't mean that Congress wouldn't uh, get rid of them, eliminate them, right? Because we saw that before in history. This isn't economics. This is ideology, and that's exactly what happened. You laid it out. What we didn't foresee, and this is what these pieces are about, is the nuanced part. So EVs went, but batteries can be seen, and critical minerals can be seen as a national security issue, and that's what happened. So you had a lot of money, way over $100 billion in generalized credit. So batteries and critical minerals are one of the one of the technologies, and pots, that the money that those monies, for example, that $100 billion in loan authority can go to, and and I expect it to, right? So for example, drones have revolutionized warfare. We saw that in Ukraine. We saw that in Azerbaijan, and Pentagon, U.S. is you know, crawled into this, super slow. We've given away the drone industry to the Chinese. Chinese control the drone industry, and we've got to get into that industry. And so one of the ideas is electric powered drones, and so you've got companies like Lighten, who I profile in another piece today, that's aiming its lithium sulfur batteries at drone uh, long distance drones. And in fact, they say their battery can power a fixed wing drone for 8 hours. Um, on the other interesting wrinkle here is that the Republicans went hammer and tongs after Ford for its licensing deal with CATL. The House version of, are you TBBB, I think, is what you're calling this bill, and the House version of the bill would have killed the Ford credits, right? It basically tightened up the, um the rules so much that, Ford itself said that they wouldn't qualify, but the Senate came back, rewrote those rules, and Ford now thinks that it will qualify. But they opened up, and I have tracked that this goes back to Panasonic, it goes back to the senators in Kansas. They opened the door to Chinese companies forming joint ventures with US-based companies, and those joint ventures could make batteries and qualify for the IRA tax credits. The way that would work, it would be hard but not impossible. So, Chinese company would own, the Chinese partner would be up to 25% owned by a Chinese entity, or if it were a partnership of Chinese companies, it could go up to 40% ownership of the joint venture. And then the American, or it could be another, right? Let's say it's Volkswagen, right? Or Toyota, right? A Japanese or a German partner in the United States, they would own the 60 or the 75%. Then they would have to meet another layer of qualifications. They would have to use local, a large majority of local materials. So from the outset, uh, uh, I think it's 60% local materials to start out with in 2026, up to 85% local in 2029. The lobbyists who I spoke to about this said that the impression they are getting by speaking to their clients. I spoke to several lobbyists, by the way, to get that, that story nailed down, and there's interest, right? US-based companies do, uh, do have an interest in forming these partnerships, and why do they? Because they need them, right? Yeah, right? There, the China has the know-how. The US has lost the capacity, or I shouldn't say lost, never had the capacity to manufacture lithium ion battery cells at scale, and, the Chinese know how to do it. They also have got the leading LFP on the planet, and so what you would get out of these partnerships is you would get, the Chinese know-how, the, US-based partner, from the outset would be manufacturing at, world-class levels, and earning the IRA tax credit, through 2032, and, that's pretty
Can
good
I
deal.
can I just jump in there? I mean,
Yeah.
how viable do you think that really is? I mean, we'll come into the local content rules second, but first up, I mean, I think President Trump was pretty clear all the way through his campaign that he wanted to attract investment in the US, and he didn't mind if that was Chinese investment. And then obviously, you've seen this um, being incorporated into the how many Bs? Big Beautiful Battery Bill. Anyway, but how viable from a sort of grassroots bottom up level do you think it is to actually get the Chinese investing in a joint venture plant? I mean, we've seen the Ford-CATL plant. I mean, how much um, opposition it's engendered. And if you look at that as a blueprint for how the Chinese may be sort of treated in the US from a bottom up level, how viable do you think it is for the Chinese to come in as joint venture partners?
Yeah, I think so there are several good questions, of which that is one, and so let's start with that one. Um, I think it depends on Trump, right? If Trump puts his thumb on the scale and tells his people, "This is good," I think that's how it'll be seen. So that's one thing, but one of the, I think, but, there is the materials, qualifica and there is not, right? Right, there is not 60% American content to be
For
had.
one gigafactory, let
Right,
alone
yeah.
multiple.
So they would have to, right, quick gin that up, but also in the bill, Matt, interestingly, it looks like it's back to the Biden era US and friends. It's uh, non-Chinese content. So it looks like everything will depend on what Treasury comes out with for guidance, but it looks like it could be, right? It could be US and friends. So that's one thing. The other thing is, what's Beijing gonna do? Right? Right, so the Chinese, uh, government has already signaled last year, I think it was last year, that, they don't favor, a lot of this technology, LFP technology in particular, going abroad.
Yeah, the
Uh
fourth generation stuff. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right, right, and I think that so I asked Ford last week, "Is that stuff that you're, licensing, is that 4th generation?" Well, they didn't wanna say, so I don't think it is,
Yeah.
right? What they said was, "It's the best CATL technology you can get outside, China, except for Europe," which
Right.
means, right, so the Hungary plant, and the German plant, and the US plant will all be, you know 3rd generation, I don't know which generation, but it's not the 5-minute charge stuff.
Right.
And then Matt, the other question, that's raised, and Howard, you already raised this yourself when you were talking about what Graceland told you, and that's about demand. So what's left out of this equation, the brilliant thing about the Biden IRA was demand push and or demand pull, I should say, and supply push. So you're going to have the supply push, but you're not going to have that demand pull, and that's that's gulf, right? That'll be important, and so, really, we're waiting, so what this does is it drops in my Matt, I'll be interested to hear what you think, but what I think it keeps the patient on the IV. Right? And so the patient does get better, but eventually has to go into physical therapy. And so in like 2028 or 2029, the cost of batteries, this is going to continue, the process of pushing down the cost of batteries. It'll, start a supply chain forming, uh, and then in 28 or 29, you might organically get that demand pull, because EVs will be cheaper. Uh, that'll be the hope.
I mean, I think what worries me about this, and I don't think you can take the big, beautiful battery bill apart from tariffs. I think you've got to factor in tariffs and the big, beautiful bill as one of the same. What worries me about this is that you're setting up an environment whereby you're effectively saying, well, we as US industry, we can't compete with the rest of the world. We need to be ring fenced. And you're building a situation whereby, yes, you can sell US produced batteries and electric vehicles and ESS in the US market, but maybe you won't be able to sell them in other markets because they're going to be too high cost to compete in those markets. And I think what we are, building towards here is effectively a two-tier energy transition where China is still the world's factory and they're still producing very cheap electric vehicles and batteries and solar and ESS. And if you're prepared to buy Chinese electric vehicles and batteries and solar and ESS, then you can deliver your energy transition very cheaply and economically. But if you're not, and you want to tariff it, and you want to push the Chinese out of your domestic market, then you're building a very expensive energy transition, and it may not be deliverable if it's that expensive. And that's what worries me about this, because you effectively are penalizing the US consumer and the US industrial base by making the energy transition in the US very, very expensive. And I just worry about where the US goes from here, as a globally competitive market.
Yeah. So if I can respond to that, I wholeheartedly agree with what you've said, that it is wrong-headed, short-sighted. Pick your word to ring fence, and that Chinese technology is going to get into the U.S. whether there's a ring fence or not. One backdoor is the Chinese EV companies and battery companies can sell and set up plants in Europe. European players will therefore build cars to compete with those Chinese cars, and then that technology will be transferred, that European, into the United States and built in those European car makers' plants here, and competing with Detroit. And so it's right. I mean, so it's not a whole answer. It's wrong. Trump is in denial that, right, that there's this huge industry, right, technology-based industry. It's not a democratic conspiracy. EVs are not, right? And so, like, you got to be open eyed. He's not, his party is not, and it's really bad. I mean, I think like it's part of a disastrous economic policy, uh, which, would be a whole other or two podcasts. But yeah, but anyway, yes. So I agree with.
I do kind of wonder if President Trump is kind of, I mean, he shouldn't be because obviously he had Elon Musk in his government, but I do kind of wonder if he's looking at data from sort of 2, 3, 4 years ago when, the EVs of that day were not competitive and they did have to be subsidized, etc. But now, with the current EV technology, which has emerged from China, but is in, as you said, lots of countries now. Um, we're not in that situation. We don't need to subsidize EVs. So I wasn't surprised to see the 7,500 tax credit go. I think everybody expected the 7,500 tax credit to go, but I was quite surprised to see, the rest of it go. Particularly on the sort of clean energy side as well, which is going to impact the best demand for batteries as well. So, yeah, I think we learned in the first Trump presidency never to bet against President Trump and what he was going to do. But maybe we just needed that re-emphasized at the beginning of this presidency again.
Well, Howard and I predicted this, right? I mean, because Matt, this is a replay of what Trump did with Obamacare. He gets it in his mind. He's like the lion taking over, right, from his predecessor. You kill all the cubs, from your predecessor, and he did that with Obamacare. It was
This looks a little bit ropey in terms of the battery side, but one of the areas where I have been very surprised is to see the amount of money that's going into the raw materials side, and not just the money, the planning streamlining, which is something that the U.S. raw materials industry has really struggled with over the last sort of 10 to 15 years. So what's your take on that? Do you think now that we'll start to see sustainable recovery in the raw materials industry in the U.S.?
So the short answer is I don't know, because I mean there is a lot. There's a ton of money, like in that Pentagon bill. There's a ton of money for critical minerals. It depends where it's going. Is this going to be smart money? Like for example, I mean this is your wheelhouse, but it seems to me, the money doesn't need to go to mining, but to processing, right? Like, right, bring the stuff in, or even build, the sulfate plants where it's mined, and bring, the chemicals here. And I fear because of this, kind of chest beating machismo, around this, the whole atmosphere, that it's going to be, just like it's going to be this drill baby drill thing. Um, what do you like? Where do you think the money's if you've got scarce dollars, critical minerals, where should it go?
Well, I mean, I think that there are some commodities where it needs to go. So, commodities like lithium, like copper, um, you know, the big issue with the battery supply chain, and you're absolutely dead right. The big issue with the battery supply chain is in some of these commodities, there is a fair amount of upstream supply, but in most of these commodities, there is not enough processing. So, if you look at something like high purity manganese, for instance, there just is not any processing at the moment outside China. Spherical graphite, ditto. I mean, there's the Syrah plant, which is, I understand, still ramping up, but outside that plant, there's nothing else outside China of sufficient volume anyway. In the nickel space, it's a little bit more sort of, um, it's a little bit more well supplied, but in some of these really core critical materials, it is very tight. I mean, even in the rare earth space, I mean, we talked about, Howard talked about humanoid robots in his introduction. And in the rare earth space, yeah, there are raw material supplies ex China, but there is practically no processing capacity. So you're absolutely dead right. There is a need for investment in processing capacity, but similarly, if you want to set up your own supply chains in the US, you also do need to invest in upstream. And historically, over the last 10 or 15 years, it has been very, very difficult indeed to invest in upstream in the US because of the planning situation. But the new administration seems to have streamlined that. And if they are, successful in doing that, it can only be positive from a US point of view.
Uh, can I follow that up, Matt? Because by the time this podcast airs, it'll be known there was an announcement just happened over the last three hours. Um, MP Materials, the rare earth um, mining company, announced that it's going into business with the U.S. government. The Pentagon is becoming its largest shareholder. It's
Wow.
investing $400 million in MP Materials, and it's gonna and a guaranteed offtake and a guaranteed price floor. And, so I look back, quick when this came out, it came out in the morning Eastern Time, I found no precedent for this. No, there in World War One, the US got into one kind of, business to help, supply some materials for the troops. That was it in World War One. World War Two, nothing, right? It's all private enterprise. In peacetime, nothing. And, so the you know, and of course, there are bailouts, right? The US government bailed out GM and became a shareholder, but not a permanent shareholder. And so,
To tell you the truth, the most interesting thing you said to me is the two words price floor. Because obviously that's something that we've talked about a lot with regards to critical materials, particularly, setting up a supply chain in the US. And obviously rare earths is a relatively small market, but if they are willing to set up a price floor, that goes a long way towards, decentralizing the supply chain away from China. But the big question is, are they only happy to do it for that one asset, um, as opposed to the whole industry? Because, that asset on its own isn't going to be enough to probably supply all of the rare earth that the West needs going forward.
yeah. What are but when you're when you're adva advantagizing, if that is a word, creating an
Well, let's
advantage.
use it anyway.
Yeah. The one but what are downsides of that, of doing that?
Well, again, it has a cost. So obviously, if the prevailing price in the market is less than your price floor, then it's a cost to the government um, over the medium to longer term. And then obviously the other issue is how long does your price floor last? Because if you finance a new project or develop a new project by putting in a price floor, how viable is that project over the longer term if a new government then turns around and says, actually, we're taking out that price floor? So that's that's a big risk. It's sort of, I kind of feel at the moment that sort of raw material strategy and critical material strategy is sort of flip flopping between political parties, and nobody can arrive at a you know well, this should be, let's all sit down together, Democrats, Republicans, right wing, left wing, in the US and in Europe and in Japan and in Australia, and say, look, let's agree on a strategy for the next 20 years that is right for our country. Because at the moment, it's like, one presidency is in, the next presidency, it's the complete opposite, and then it flip-flops all over the place. So I think that's one of the issues that we as a raw materials industry have to deal with. Because, if I'm a mining company, I'm investing in a project for 20 or 30 years. I'm not investing in a project for 3 or 4 years. And if the next presidency comes in and they go, well, actually, we're not sticking with that price floor. You're left high and dry, having dropped, hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars into a project, and it may not be viable. So I think that's the biggest risk for the industry.
Matt, I'm calling up. It's 9:40, and MP Materials stock has started trading. It's up 50%. I'm reading as we're speaking. The DoD has entered into a 10-year agreement establishing a price floor commitment of $110 per
Wow.
kilogram for MP Materials NdPr products, stockpiled or sold, reducing vulnerability to non-market forces and ensuring stable and predictable cash flow with shared upside. And for a period of 10 years following the construction of this is a second magnet facility, the 10X facility, DoD has agreed to ensure that 100% of the magnets produced at the 10X facility will be purchased by defense and commercial customers with shared upside. The company has obtained a commitment letter from J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs to provide $1 billion of financing for the cost of construction and developing of the 10X facility, et cetera. And there's a lot more in here. So, Steve, you were asking me, do I still believe there is a grand bargain coming? And I thought, I think the answer is, prospectively, very much yes. But and I was going to bring up, and you rightly brought up, rare earths are the Achilles heel for the negotiations between China and the U.S. If you remember, about a few weeks ago, Trump said, we have a deal with China, right? We're no longer reliant on magnets, right? But that wasn't really and rare earth. So the fact that was like the second line after we have a deal just shows how this tiny industry, you know, um, is he needs to address it. So in today's announcements, my reading in today's announcement is that like this will go some ways towards solving, a major sticking point to a broader deal with China. There are going to be many other elements, to this. And I agree with another comment that you made, Steve, earlier, is that if Trump wants something, he'll push the Republicans along. And he's been very focused on getting this bill done. He wanted it done July 4th. He got it done July 4th. He is moving with, massive speed on a whole host of things. Um, they keep delaying the trade agreements with other countries. July 9th passed now, and now it's August 1st. But, with the EU and Canada and a few others, right, he wants to get those out of the way. But the big kahuna, is China. So I'm still of the mind that, uh, there is a prospective kind of grand bargain. You rightly point out Beijing may not want to give, their cutting edge technology here. Ford, Jim Farley said, like, we're dinosaurs if we don't, the Xiaomi, I think XU7, which he's been driving. He keeps talking about, he recognizes the risk. GM, has more vehicles on the road. Actually, the GM sales are not doing so bad on the EV front. They're making some progress with their, and they have plans with their LMR, battery. So I do think, I hope that, CATL, the stock is up in Hong Kong after their Hong Kong IPO. 90% of the proceeds of that were for their battery factory in Hungary. I would hope that, just like we welcome the Japanese and the Koreans, back in the day, Trump's all about, invest in America, and we'll do something. So I definitely think there's scope for that, and I hope it plays out later this year. I will comment. I mean, there's a lot of negatives out there, but there are a number of positives. I'm frustrated by, you're absolutely right, Steve. There is this kind of tribalism. I don't understand why. There's no politicking of this in other countries in the way there is in the U.S. So, The Biden was Department of Energy. It was climate-focused industrial policy supporting batteries, solar, wind, EVs, etc. Uh, Chris Wright now at the Department of Energy couldn't be more different, than Jennifer Granholm. But he seems he does seem to be consciously going after solar and wind in favor of coal and obviously nuclear. He's been supportive of and other fossil fuels. So I don't fully understand all of that. And, when you have utilities like Next Era Energy, the biggest utility in America, saying that solar and wind plus batteries are the cheapest and fastest to deploy. Matt, you commented about the Lazard, levelized cost of energy report that came out in the last time we interviewed. I mean, broadly, it's a libertarian, somewhat of a, yes, they're going after renewables, but they're basically saying, hey, we got to cut somewhere. And if these technologies are so great, why do we need to subsidize them? So,
I think it's all very well not subsidizing them, but not subsidizing them and taxing them, that's a little bit different.
but they didn't tax them. That you're absolutely right on that, and that was a crazy thing that appeared, but that didn't pass. You're right. Taxing them would definitely, hurt the industry, and hopefully that doesn't reappear. But our there is a shift to the Defense Department. There is money available. He has been deregulating very significantly. It is a mine baby mine. It is a Sinter baby Sinter. I think Adamus Intelligence used that in relation to rare earths. Hopefully it's a processing baby processing mentality. They are pushing things forward. They are recognizing America does need to you know build mines and processing. I mean, the Biden administration, for all their demand pull, focused way too much on the downstream, but then on the implementation of it, with NEPA regulations and other environmental hurdles, and also strings attached to money in terms of environmental justice and other labor, unionized labor, it increased the cost. I mean, if Thacker Pass got a $2.3 billion loan, the cost of that project went to $3 billion, in part because of those strings that were added, to the loan, um, requirements. So I guess it's just this administration is, it's now, yes, it's defense focused. It is decoupling. It's national security. It's decoupling from China. The decoupling from China is accelerating under Trump, right? Now, to a potentially the negative point that you're talking about, like you might have a lot more supply, and not enough demand. And if we're already in an oversupplied market for a lot of these um, critical minerals, what's that going to do to price overall? Like now, this MP thing says, okay, where is NDPR, Matt, today? It's like 60, right? Or something like that.
It was, yes.
60. And here we have a price floor at 110 for MP. Now, could they do that in nickel, right? To develop, a project like Talon Metals, right? In Michigan, right? Could they do that in lithium, right? The way that, I saw John Evans at the Fast Markets conference, and he didn't tell me specifically, but he made pretty clear that there is definitely a price floor that was agreed between GM and Lithium Americas. Otherwise, Jigar Shah would not have loaned over 22 years, right? So they didn't disclose it in the way that it's now being disclosed here. Is this like a bellwether of what could happen, as if the Trump administration with a Defense Department, mindset says, shoot, we need nickel, we need lithium, we need cobalt, or is it this is like isolated to rare earths where we are it has more military applications and we're more vulnerable there than anywhere else.
But I mean, I definitely think that we as the West are more vulnerable in rare earths, because of the current structure of the industry and the Chinese domination of the processing part of the industry. So I think that it's not a surprise that the first major time we saw this was in rare earths. I think the other point that's very interesting is obviously it's focused on NdPr, which is where the Mountain Pass mine is very much focused. But it doesn't really talk about heavy rare earths, mostly because Mountain Pass doesn't have a hell of a lot of heavy rare earths. But obviously, it's the heavy rare earths which are most exposed to the defense industry. So does this open up the possibility of the Pentagon going out and say funding a um, ionic clay project in Brazil or elsewhere in the US or something like that to access the sort of heavy rare earths? Should we be looking at that now as as something that the Pentagon potentially is going to want to do? Because this ties up probably a pretty reasonable amount of NdPr and magnet rare earths, but dysprosium, terbium, other heavy rare earths that are used in armaments, in rangefinders and things like that. Um, there's no, we're not seeing anything for that. So it'd be very interesting to see, where they go from here.
That would be interesting. Brazil was in the news with a 50% tariff, so I guess if they were to do what you're suggesting, he'd probably carve that out for at least that application. Okay, another thing, one of you brought up Tesla, and I had so Steve, we agreed on some things, we disagreed on a few other things. I was optimistic about the bromance that was developing in July of last year with Elon and Trump, and that looked to be absolutely right until about a month ago or a month and a half ago. Um, so uh, where there's robotaxis and there's humanoid robots, right? Which is what is really underpinning Tesla's valuation at present. And those could be big demand drivers outside of the military. Um, but Trump hasn't really talked about, he's not worried about robots or robotaxis so much. And what's your assessment of these applications, and what you have been reading through, the big beautiful battery bill?
Yeah. So on Tesla itself, I think Tesla's in trouble. It is in trouble. It may lose money for the first time in years in the fourth quarter this year, and even more so in the first quarter next year. That's because the $7,500 credit goes off, and it will stop receiving regulatory payments for regulatory credits, which had been $1 billion. It was on track to earn $1 billion this year just from those credits. Its sales are dropping in every region, and you mentioned Xiaomi, the Xiaomi SU7, which is the competition to the Model 3, sells more than the Model 3. Again, in the first half of this year, it sold the Xiaomi model outsold. It's the only competitor to the Model 3 that outsold the Model 3 in China. Last week, Xiaomi came out with the XU7, which is the competitor to the Model Y, which 2 years running is the best-selling car of any kind in the world. It had according to Xiaomi, 200,000 orders in the first 3 minutes, 289,000 in the first hour. They didn't say what happened after that.
Maybe
But
the
those are a
system's
lot.
crashed.
Yeah, those are a lot of cars, and so it. it is in trouble, and it's put all its eggs in robotaxis and humanoid robots. And I know that these are the flavors of the day, but I've got my doubts. I'm skeptical about robotaxis, about how big that business becomes. Why do robotaxis become bigger than the taxi business? And so is it really worth, $1 trillion of valuation? And humanoid robots, the way that Musk depicts them in every home, mowing your lawn and so on. This is not soon. Like that is not soon, right? So yeah, so I don't know where. And now he not Trump, Musk has gone into the politics business. It's highly risky. He got into bed with Trump, then he decided he didn't like Trump, and of course, Trump turned on him. That's the way Trump is, and his, SpaceX is vulnerable, and robotaxis are vulnerable. Trump is retaliatory. Like, look what he's doing. He's investigating the head of the former head of our intelligence agencies because of investigations that occurred under Biden. Ordered the Justice Department. He ordered the Secret Service to follow James Comey because of a tweet. If Musk is not careful in these politics, Trump will retaliate against the robo-taxis. I think that's, without question. And, so I'm, worried about, I've kind of gone on a, rant here, completely forgetting what question you asked, actually.
You answered it. How do you see robotaxis and humanoid robots evolving as a demand uh, driver, for critical raw materials, and how might the Elon Trump dynamic um, impact that? So I think you did answer the question with a not positive view.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Just coming back on this rare earths, guys, and Matt especially. Um, the DoD has just doubled the cost of everybody else in the United States who uses rare earth magnets. Uh, right? I mean, right, because that's going to be the signal. That price floor is going to be the signal.
Well,
Well,
the Pentagon's going to buy it.
yeah.
Well,
I
the
mean,
Pentagon
it would.
said military and commercial, right?
I mean, it would be if they supported other operations, but if they're just going to support that operation, maybe it comes to sort of somewhere in the middle rather than that exact level.
Well,
Um,
well, I'm
And
not
it's
sure
10
that.
years. It's 10 years.
Yeah,
So like
that's
after 10 years,
yeah, that's not the way economics works, right? I mean, there's a signal, and then other people charge uh, the same price.
well, yes and no. I mean, it depends whether other people can get the same price. So obviously, I guess the way I kind of look at it is think about it in a stock, for instance. You're trying to raise money in a stock, and a strategic holder comes in and say the stock's priced at 50 cents, and a strategic holder comes in and says, "Fine, we'll pay $1." Does the stock price go to $1? Probably not. It probably only goes to about 75 cents. And I guess that's kind of what you're looking at here. I'm not convinced that it will go all the way to sort of 110 because it's just one project. Now, if they came in and say supported 5 or 6 projects at that level, um, then that's different. But I think for just one project, I'm not convinced it goes all the way to that level.
Okay, well, that's
but,
all right. Well, let's
but,
let's
but,
agree to disagree on that, on the price.
Time will tell.
but by the
So,
way,
the cost goes up. The cost of doing business, people who use rare earths, we use rare earth magnets, the cost in the United States goes up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the cost for the consumer effectively goes up.
Let's see how it plays out. But what's interesting here, another nuance, is that the Department of Defense is agreeing to purchase $400 million of a newly created series of convertible preferred stock, okay, and a warrant permitting DoD to purchase additional shares in the company's common stock. This goes to Howard Lutnick on the All In podcast or some other interview, talked about, if the U.S. government's going to kind of come into these things, let's get some upside with warrants. So here, the Department of Defense is going to become the U.S. government is going to become the largest shareholder of MP Materials at a parent company level, sharing in the upside for the taxpayers, which is a good thing, which is in contrast to what I call government motors, buying a 38% stake at project level for Lithium America's Thacker Pass project in order to get that loan. Right. So here, it's a very big difference, right? A $2.3 billion loan at treasury rates, it's a subsidized interest rate here. In this case, a $400 million is coming in to a company. This is a public-private partnership now. This is a different type of industrial policy. So it's still picking winners, right? America, the government is picking winners. So from a stock selection, point of view, whether or not the supply demand and the overall price of a given commodity, we always say commodity equities follow commodity prices. But when you have the government, and or a big company like GM coming in and setting a different non-market price, the economics of that particular company, its profitability is going to be impacted differently. So this is a nuance. It's interesting. Is this just a one-off on rare earths, or is this going to be applied to maybe domestic copper projects or domestic graphite projects or nickel projects or other lithium projects? To be seen. But rare earths was clearly the Achilles heel, as we've talked about with China. It's very prominent. It's been in the news all this year, and it's supported the stock prices of those companies. You rightly point out, Matt. MP Materials is a fine project, but the rare earths are going to the demand for rare earths, as far as we're understanding, if you're wrong, Steve, and humanoid robots and other applications do come out, and drones and military applications, like there is a what EVs were to lithium. All the robots, drones, military applications are to rare earths, and there's a big potential shortage. And MP Materials is not going to be enough, right? And Linus is not going to be enough. There's a lot of other rare earths or projects that will need to be developed, and processing capability, which is has been hard historically, but was done in the 40s and 50s in America. It's not impossible. It just we outsourced it, too much, in a similar way we outsourced too much, in lithium. But yeah, the supply demand for rare earths are not rare, but many projects need to be developed. Lithium's not rare. Many more projects will need to be developed. Again, to be seen. It'll be very interesting to see if they replicate this MP type deal with in other minerals. But to your point, Steve, a major point you were mentioning in your articles is that things have shifted from the Department of Energy to the Department of Defense, and nothing could be a stronger statement to that than today's announcement on MP.
Yeah.
The U.S. government taking a parent level, becoming the largest shareholder in a public company. It's kind of like
Yeah.
unprecedented.
Well, it is unprecedented. It is. I mean, that's what we were talking about. Um, while you're trying, by the way, I wanted to clarify on that forecast regarding humanoids and robotaxis. Um, it's a matter of timing, right? So I'm not saying never with humanoids, but Tesla stock is based as though robotaxis and humanoids happen in the near term, and that isn't what it looks like. This deal with MP, you know, it looks like, right, it looks like what Trump did with Ukraine, right? I mean, it looks like this strong army thing. So why does so you give them a price floor, you give them $1 billion to build the thing. So those are, do you need both of those? Do you need a price floor and you need the money? And $400 million, we're gonna buy $400 million of your stock. I'm not sure who demanded what, but it looks, it looks kinda crazy, are all of those components necessary to end up with a rare earth magnet industry in the United States? And, does it look like when we went into Ukraine and demanded that Zelensky, if he wanted weapons, then, he had to make the U.S. a shareholder in all Ukrainian economic projects.
I think the Ukraine thing was negotiating again. He just wants to. He's trying to solve the Ukraine-Russia war. He's He's fundamentally paranoid about rare earths, right? And it translates into Greenland as well. But I think, his administration is smart enough to realize that those are very early stage and very difficult, projects. But here in the United States, you have the only producing rare earth mine. So that this solves the problem in the immediate term. And again, this is a 10-year deal. So, um, I think that's a good time frame, and in some ways, the U.S. government invested in Tesla. I guess they got repaid a loan. I think they bailed out they bail out GM and Stellantis, and I think maybe they made money, on that. So it's not unprecedented, in a distressed situation, but it is unprecedented in this kind of critical. But yeah, I don't. This is all real time. I haven't analyzed, the deal, but having the government subscribe in convertible preferred with warrant upside, that's good for the taxpayer. Being an offtake partner for 10 years, I think is good. They need these materials, and setting a price floor so that MP Materials could make money, some money, right? They need to build it. I mean, fundamentally, it's capitalism. Is it too much? Like, I don't know. I mean, this is not easy. I'd rather see this. This guarantees the viability of it, more than if you're just, lending the company money and then having, them, have no predictability on the price. I think there's a debt component of this as well. It says it's a yeah. I mean, J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs are providing $1 billion of financing, for this on top of the 400 million, in convertible. So in order to get that 1 billion from commercial lenders at reasonable rates, um, I think this is going to be good for the U.S. government. This is better than let's say a $2.3 billion loan, but let's say uh, Thacker Pass doesn't work, right? It goes bankrupt, right? And then the government then has to kind of take it over and make it work, right? In this case, you have a private company. It's operating. Obviously, one's a greenfield and this is a brownfield expansion, but still, making magnets is a new business for MP. This is not what they have done, historically. So they're saying, look, okay, we're going to guarantee you some profitability, and the market's going to kind of figure out, what it is. But um, if they succeed, the government makes money, right? And they'll sell their warrants, and that's good for the taxpayer as well. So I
This is
think
gonna Yeah,
I'm liking this.
sure. Yeah,
You
I
know,
think it's gonna be very it is very controversial, and I think there's gonna be, a lot of commentary around this. It's a total sweetheart deal, and, I mean, look, it just happened, so we're just, reacting, but I'm surprised you guys are the minerals guys, right? Did You should be able to immediately assess, did MP need all the components that are being described there to make this thing a go? Did it need the billion and the price floor and the 400 million, are all of those necessary?
Well, the price floor, I mean, the price floor is kind of like the holy grail for the minerals industry. The price floor has basically been what the industry has been asking for 2 or 3 years to allow it to compete with China. And the price floor basically backs out the impact of overseas prices on the industry. Um, so it's going to be very interesting to see whether the price floor is something that crops up in other negotiations, in other funding structures, um, because if it does, then you're basically saying, look, you can afford to develop these projects, and we'll underwrite them for 10 years. And that's obviously always been the negative from the industry, because if the price stays around $60 to $70 a kilo and you're underwriting sales at $110 a kilo, then you, the government, are paying, to have that asset in production. But the comeback has always been the same from the industry. Look, we're going to drop, a hell of a lot of capital into this project, and you're saying you need it as a strategic asset. You need this as a strategic product. We can't guarantee that we'll be profitable at current prevailing prices. So you, as the government, have got to guarantee us a price. So it's about six and a half a dozen. But the price floor, I had a discussion with the UK government about this recently, and they weren't interested in giving price floors. They said, well, the cost to the government is just not a mechanism that we would look at. And, obviously it doesn't look like the Europeans are very interested in giving price floors. So this is a big move in the industry, and I guess we'll see over the next sort of days and weeks and months what the fallout might be.
Yeah, the Europeans are not, there are a lot of countries, right? America's one country, and
Mm.
this is, again, I keep saying it, it is the Achilles heel in his negotiation. It is the little industry, $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion, small industry, rare earths. Um, and Xi Jinping is basically saying, this little industry is the linchpin, to kind of cutting a deal. So I think, to be honest, this may be a one-off, or there's not going to be, there may not be that many of these, because rare earths is, MP is very scarce as the only thing in the U.S. And like lithium, there's lots of lithium, and there's lots of other projects and other commodities. So um, I think, is it a sweetheart deal? Maybe. I think the U.S. government getting equity, I think for the taxpayer, I think the taxpayer will benefit. Like overall, um, who's it a sweetheart deal to? Obviously, MP is benefiting today in the stock market. They still need to like build. MP Materials as a company, and I followed this, through the bankruptcy and through the SPAC. We spoke with Jim Litinsky, a few years ago. I wrote about it in my Lithium Ion Bull, right? The idea always was, let's just get this rare earths mine up and running, but it's a mine to magnet strategy, right? And he's been implementing, the stage 2 and stage 3, and this is uh to build another magnet factory on top of the one that he's been rolling out in the last kind of couple of years. So this is a long-term, important story that Jim Litinsky identified, in 2017. I think when he bought Molly Corp out of bankruptcy. We're now 8 years into it, and now he's a young guy. He is going a long way to solve a critical vulnerability that America has in rare earths. We have other vulnerabilities in other critical raw materials, and Trump is making a lot of moves toward that. But not only is it the linchpin, of the dialogue with China, but it's also because it has so many defense applications, right? Even though it's small, the rare earth magnets for defense put us at real vulnerability, especially with modern warfare, as we're seeing played out, in the Ukraine war, and the Middle East as well. So anyway, we spent an enormous amount of time on MP. and the rare earths in this news because it happened in real time while we were talking about it, but it is relevant uh, to the arguments that you were making, Steve, in these two articles, that batteries are being supported, and the Department of Defense is a player in the battery critical and critical mineral supply chain. So this could be not just a one-off. There could be a lot more. We'll see what happens, but I think we'll end it there. Thank you, Steve, for your commentary, and Matt, for joining in with your own commentary, but also sharing in the conversation here. And as a reminder to all viewers, if you like this video, please like and subscribe to Rockstock channel and hit the notification bell. And so you get all advance notice of whenever we publish a video. And Steve, you are available on Twitter. What's your handle?
Steve LeVine.
Steve LeVine, at Steve LeVine. And the electric, just remind us, costs how much per year?
Well, there's a deal on right now, $300 a year.
$300 a year to get, all of Steve's, proprietary writing on the sector. And you could visit the Electric, which is a publication of another group called The Information. We'll flash that up on the screen and put a link in the show notes. And Matt, you've now changed your profile on Twitter. You're now, I think, at Matt Fernley instead of at Review Battery.
Yeah, Matt_Fernley. Yeah, and on LinkedIn as well. So yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thanks again, guys.